Are you or someone you know interested in going into the medical field or want to know what it takes to become a doctor? Well, great, you've come to the right place. Let's get into it. Hello my fellow future docs, intellectuals, studiers, whoever you are watching this video. I'm excited to be bringing you the 6 most important things that I think you need to be a competitive applicant for medical school and how to succeed in those areas. This is by no means a comprehensive overview of how to get into medical school. I could probably make a video on each one of these topics that I'm going to talk about on how to really master them and be successful in your application to medical school. But this is definitely a very helpful and in-depth overview on each of these things, and wherever you are in your process on becoming a physician, I am sure it will help you out. So let's get into it. So this video is going to be a culmination of some research I've done on the top medical schools in America and their matriculant data on what experiences their students had when applying for medical school, and it's combined with some of my personal experience with applying to medical school, and so I hope this is really helpful for you guys. Alright, so I'm going to be talking about the first 2 things together really because I think it's really hard to place one as more important over the other. They're both extremely important for your application, but they are a strong GPA and MCAT score. And I would personally argue MCAT is a little more important because a high MCAT score makes a low GPA look better than a high GPA makes a low MCAT score look. And that's simply for the fact that the rigor of your education at your undergrad is very variable from different schools, different majors, different difficulties of extracurriculars you're taking, and medical schools realize that you can go through hard times in life that can lower your GPA, or maybe you can just cheat your way through classes. So the MCAT is really a standardized way to assess the knowledge you know in one big 8-hour exam that goes across all students in the same standardized way. So I would argue the MCAT is a little more important. But first thing I want to jump into is your GPA. Alright, so if you are a pre-med student, you're going to be applying to medical schools through the AMCAS application system, and they basically break your GPA down into 3 categories, and that's your overall GPA, your science GPA, and your non-science GPA. And they also specifically break your GPA down per semester, so they look at the trend of your GPA. And in general, it's always better to have an upward trend, meaning that as you progress in your classes and mature in your education, you are getting consistently better grades. But if you do have a downward GPA trend, don't fret, it's not the end of the world. I'll talk more about that in a second, but I went to PrincetonReview.com, and I'll leave a link for all my references for this video in the description. But I basically looked up what the average GPA was for all applicants and matriculants into medical school. So for those of you who don't know, an applicant is just anybody who applied to medical school that given year, and a matriculant are specifically those who got accepted into medical school that year. And what I found is that the overall GPA of all matriculants into medical school for 2017 was a 3.71, and then specifically their science GPA was a 3.64, and their non-science GPA was a 3.79. So the average of everyone who got accepted into medical school in 2017 was a 3.71, but if you keep in mind that that means that's the 50th percentile. So just as many people got accepted who had a GPA higher than that and who had a GPA lower than that. But if you're not hitting that mark, if your GPA is below that, don't be discouraged. The great thing about medical school application admissions committees is that they have a very holistic approach to your application. They don't just care about the numbers. If you have a low GPA, you can compensate for it with a higher MCAT, good personal statements, letters of recommendation, experience, different things like that. And so I'll be talking about that a little later in this video as well. I do have 2 other videos on this channel about how I specifically made a 4.0 in my undergrad and ways that I've learned how to help you learn better. And so if you want to check those out, they will be at the end of this video, and I'll leave a link in the description for those as well. Alright, so now I'm going to talk specifically about the MCAT. So the MCAT is an 8-hour exam that covers things like biology, general and inorganic chemistry, biochemistry, physics, and behavioral sciences, and critical reasoning and analysis. And so I cannot emphasize this enough. Give yourself the proper time to study for this exam. I personally recommend 2 to 3 months at least of full-time studying, or 5 to 6 months if you're going to study part-time. And when I say full-time, I do mean 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and if you're part-time, 20 hours a week, because this exam, memorization is not enough. the way that the MCAT is set up, it's passage-based questions, and they're going to be pulling from your knowledge on all the disciplines at once. And so you really need to be synthesizing and soaking in this material, living and breathing it. I know me personally, when I was studying for my MCAT, I took 5 months of part-time studying to study for it. And at the same time, I was in classes in fall. I was taking biochemistry and advanced statistics and analysis course. And I was just going to school, attending my lectures, coming home, studying for school, studying for the MCAT, going to bed, and that was my life for 5 months. So you really want to be living and breathing this material. So I want to break up the MCAT into 3 phases for you guys, and this is by no means a comprehensive overview of how to study for the MCAT. I will make sure to get a video out there for you guys on that, specifically how I did it, but I'm going to give you guys a really good general overview so you can start thinking about how to schedule your studying. But the first phase of studying for the MCAT is going to be your initial learning phase. And this is when you're in your undergrad, you're taking your biology courses, and you're learning this material for the first time. And the biggest piece of advice I can give you for that is really learn the material. Don't be studying just to get A's, but study hard and well so you can retain that information into the foreseeable future, because all that will be on the MCAT. And you're definitely getting A's in your classes is not enough to do well on the MCAT. You are going to need to do in-depth review later. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but really be soaking in these classes and learning to the best of your ability, because it'll make the review process later on so much easier. And then the second part of your MCAT studying phase is going to be your review phase. Now this is where you're either, however long you're going to study, 3 to 6 months before you take your MCAT, and this is where you're hitting the books hard, really reviewing those concepts for the MCAT and putting them into application and use. So this needs to be no longer than 6 months before your MCAT. If you start reviewing more than 6 months before, by the time you take your MCAT, you're not going to remember all that material, and you're going to have to start backtracking on your studying. So definitely don't start the review phase further back than 6 months. For my review phase, I use the Kaplan MCAT books. This is one of them here. There's 7 books in that series of books, and they're all full of really good stuff. In my personal opinion, I think it covers practically 99% of the material that you're going to see on the MCAT. At the end of every chapter in these books, they do give you a quiz to test your comprehension of the material. I would say definitely don't take these as like a practice MCAT or a preview of the kind of questions that are going to be on the MCAT. They're definitely helpful if you want to quiz yourself on the material in that chapter, but there are other ways that you need to be testing yourself for the MCAT, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I highly recommend, in conjunction with the Kaplan MCAT books, using the website mcatforme.com. I'll leave a link in the description as well for that. It's full of lecture videos on every challenging concept that's on the MCAT in every section. I know for me personally, the physics lecture videos really helped, because it's really hard for me to learn about math concepts from reading a book. And so when I had that person giving me lecture videos and showing me really how to tackle those MCAT questions through lecture, that was so much more helpful, and I really synthesized more of the material that way. Alright, then that brings me to the final phase of studying for your MCAT, which is the testing phase. This may overlap with your review phase a little bit, but by the time you start taking practice MCAT tests, you should have about 90 to 100% of the material in your head, because that's going to give you a really good estimate of where you are and what you need to study on and what things you need to work on to really get your MCAT score up. And so for this testing phase, you need to give yourself at least 3 weeks to a month for it. And the reason I say 3 weeks to a month is because you should be taking full-length MCAT practice tests, which means an 8-hour-long exam, and then afterwards it's super critical to do an in-depth review of that exam and on the questions you got wrong, so you can learn more and really up that MCAT score. And the reason that's going to take a month is because you need to take at least 6 practice tests before you go into the MCAT if you want to have a good place and be really ready for this exam. I would recommend doing at least 8 practice exams. And so that means you're going to be dedicating 8 hours to doing this exam. That's a full day. And then the next day, you are going to need at least, depending on how well you did on the practice exam, 4 to 10 hours to review all the things you got wrong. And so that's going to take 2 days of studying and review for you to do a practice MCAT exam, and if you're going to be doing 6 to 8 of those, that can be anywhere from 12 to 16 days of dedicating to this testing phase. So give yourself the necessary amount of time to be able to do that before your exam. This is super important, not just for learning how you're going to place on the exam and getting a feel for the MCAT, but it trains your brain for endurance. I remember when I took my first MCAT, I got a terrible score, and when I looked through it, it wasn't because I didn't know the answers to the questions. It was just because by the time I was like 4 hours into that exam, I was dead. My brain was not synthesizing the material. Words were coming in one ear and out the other, and I really had to train to get my brain to be able to focus for that long period of time. So it's critical to give yourself enough time to study for the MCAT and for this testing phase. So the resources that I used for my practice MCAT tests, I used all of the AAMC's practice tests. Right now they have 3 full-length tests out there, and they have 1 practice half-length test. I would recommend buying all 3 of those, taking all 3. Definitely take the practice exam, and they have a bunch of just packets of just passage-based questions for certain disciplines that you can use in your own way to make kind of your own practice MCAT exam. And if you are able to do that, that will put you in a really good place. If you want to see exactly how I did that for my MCAT studying, I can make another video about that for you guys in the future, so comment if you guys want to see some of that in the future. Kaplan also has some really good passage-based questions online to test for the MCAT. They also have, I think, a half-length practice test out there. I tried it. I really don't think it hits the mark as far as what the questions are really like on the MCAT in real life. So I think AAMC is the best way to go. It's exactly like it is on the MCAT. They're the test makers of the MCAT, so it makes sense that it would be. So definitely use AAMC, and it won't hurt to check out Kaplan's practice passage-based questions as well. And before I move on to the third most important thing I think you need on your application to medical school, I just want to give you guys 2 general tips when going into studying your MCAT that I wish I knew when I started. And the first one is, do not underestimate the CARS section. So I thought, hey, the CARS section, I'm not gonna have to study that much for. It's just critical analysis and reading skills. That's like the SAT, right? And I did pretty well on that part of the SAT, so I should do pretty well on that part of the MCAT. Boy, how wrong was I. It wasn't until I took my first practice MCAT that I realized I was scoring the worst in the CARS section. And I've heard very similar stories from other pre-meds who've taken the MCAT. And so I heavily suggest that you really study the CARS section. And I would say the Kaplan CARS book, verbal reasoning book, it's pretty good, it's good material, but the best way to really improve your score on the MCAT is just to do practice CARS passages. It's really about just learning the subtle cues within the passage that you really can hold on to be able to draw your answers in the question. And so definitely practice the CARS section a lot. And the second most important general tip I can say is to take a rest day before taking the MCAT. So the day before your MCAT, do not study. It's okay maybe at the end of the day before bed if you want to do like a quick little review, but do whatever you want that day. Take that as a treat yourself day. Treat yourself. Do not stress, do not worry. You're going to be refreshing your brain because you're going to have been studying hard for months on end, and so that rest day is really going to make it to where you go into that exam feeling refreshed, feeling awake, and feeling ready to conquer that MCAT. Alright, this brings me to the third most important thing that I think you need on your applications to be competitive for medical school, and that is extracurriculars. So the AMCAS gives you the opportunity to fill in 15 slots for extracurriculars that you did during your undergrad. And I know this sounds counterintuitive, but I would not fill out all 15 things. And the reason why is medical schools care about quality over quantity. So they know that if you are truly devoting yourself to extracurriculars that you're going to be making an impact in and that are going to be making an impact on you, you're not going to be able to divide yourself among 15 things that are worthwhile in your undergrad. So they would rather see that you've dedicated, 6 months or more to 6 activities that really made an impact in your life during your undergrad than 15 things that you just did here and there and didn't really matter so much. So I did some research and looked up some matriculant data from some of the most competitive medical schools and saw what were their extracurriculars going into medical school, and did that make a difference in their acceptance? And the most common extracurricular activities for people accepted into those schools were, of course, shadowing physicians. Then there was clinical experience, research, and community service. These seems like the foremost flashy and appealing extracurriculars that you can have that will really make your application stand out compared to other applicants. This does not mean that every extracurricular has to be academic. So medical schools also want to know that they're bringing in a diverse applicant into their community. That's going to be bringing new opinions, fresh perspectives to their classes and to their classmates. So talk about some of your hobbies that you've really devoted your time to. For example, me personally, ever since high school, I've known how to play the guitar, piano, and I sing. And so I kind of started my own business to where I give music lessons to people who are interested, and I've been doing that for a very long time, and I just love music, and so I mentioned that on my application, and I think medical schools will find that really appealing, that you're able to do well in your undergrad, do well in your extracurriculars, and also have really interesting hobbies that make you stand out as an applicant. So whatever you do in your free time, I would say don't put video game enthusiast or anything like that. Try to find a hobby that you think is unique to you and that has really challenged you and helped you grow as a person. And so the next thing I want to talk about is the personal statement. So it used to be a common phrase that they said, a good personal statement won't get you into medical school, but a bad personal statement will keep you out of medical school. And I think that's a little out of date now. I think what's more accurate is a really good personal statement is really going to increase your chances of being accepted to a medical school. We live in a day where more applicants are applying to medical school than ever, but medical schools really haven't increased the number of seats that much in the past 10-20 years, which means admissions committees are reading more personal statements than they ever had. They know exactly what you are going to say, so try to make a personal statement that sticks out and really talks about your personal experience, how you're unique as a human, and the things that you can add to medical school. And I think it'll grab their eye and turn heads and put your application higher in the pile than those others. So the personal statement is definitely important. My first tip when writing a personal statement is going to be engaging. So you don't want a admissions committee reading your personal statement and then getting bored halfway through. You want to really engage them with, I would suggest, a hook in the beginning. So something that really captures their attention and they're not sure where you're going with it, but you have connected ideas and stories that brings it to a nice end. I mean, try to have a beginning and a middle and an end, just so they're not feeling like they're reading disconnected ideas and are getting bored halfway through. And so my second piece of advice is try to mention your personal story. So they want to know who you are as a person. They want to know what makes you unique, what makes you diverse. And so talk about your personal life. What in your personal life has brought you to this culmination of wanting to go into medicine? Because let's face it, medicine, some people are really, the salary may be really appealing, but it's a lot of hard work, and that hard work draws people away. So why are you deciding to go against the norm and pursue medicine? There's got to be some kind of basis where your passion is coming from. So be personal and mention your unique story. Definitely have boundaries. So don't get too personal to where it's uncomfortable. You know that feeling when you're talking to someone and then all of a sudden they mention, yeah, I've had OCD my whole life. I just feel like I can't keep things together, or whatever they say, and you're just like, okay, that was a little TMI. So be careful on how personal you get, still be professional, and but mention your personal story. My third tip is to talk about some of your qualifications. So don't just talk about why you want to go into medicine or what drew you to medicine, but also if you've done some research or if there was a clinical experience that was especially meaningful to you, talk about it. Talk about some of your roles in it and the impact you made, and that'll just make you stand out among other applicants and make you look more professional, and you should definitely mention that in your application. And the last tip I want to give for your personal statement is have it proofread a bunch of times. Have your friends read it, have your family read it, have your coworkers read it, but especially have someone, if you shadow doctors, have a doctor read it, or somebody that knows what the medical field is about, or a professor, someone who knows what personal statements are about, so you can get a professional looking over it and giving you their professional opinion. Alright, now the fifth most important thing you need to have when applying for medical schools are strong letters of recommendation. So you want to have at least 4 to 5 letters when you're applying to your medical school. 2 of those should come from professors, and the other 2 or 3 should come from professional contacts that you have throughout your undergrad journey. That could be like physicians you've shadowed, your job, your boss there, or maybe the leader of the community service organization that you've been working for, and different things like that. But one thing that I can't emphasize enough is do not just walk into class one day, go up to your professor and say, hey, I'm getting an A in your class, could you write me a letter? Because then all they can tell about you is that you made an A in their class. And that's not really going to grab the attention of application committees. What's really going to grab their attention is that that professor can speak personally about you and about specific accomplishments they've seen you make that make you sound like an excellent student. And the way you do that is making professional relationships with these people. The best place to be in for this is if you are a freshman in your undergrad. That'll give you the time to develop these good relationships. But I actually started in my junior year making these relationships, so if you are later in your education, it's totally possible. But what you should do is you should talk to these professors or the boss at your job and go to their office hours and tell them your dream. Tell them that you want to be a physician and that you think their letter will really make a difference. And I promise, if you are a good student and they see you as a professional individual, they'll really want to help you and they'll want to see you excel. And so how you create these professional relationships is you tell them in your office hours that you may want a letter of recommendation for them in the future, and then keep them updated on your life. So say you're a freshman and you talk to this professor and say, in a few years I'd love to get a letter of recommendation for you. Or if you're a junior in a year, or so on and so forth. And then if you start a research opportunity or community service, just go ahead and shoot them an email and say, hey, I started this research, I've really grown in this way and all that stuff. And as you do that, you'll be updating them on your life, and they're really going to love that, having that relationship with a student. And when they're finally able to write your letter of recommendation, they're going to be able to talk about you like they personally know you and be able to tell them of your accomplishments. And not only is this going to let medical school applications committees know that you're an excellent student, it's going to know that you've made professional relationships with other people that really like you as an individual, and that's going to make you stand out to application committees a lot. And then the last important thing I want to talk to you guys about is research. So research experiences in your undergrad is the little cherry on the top of the whipped cream that makes you stand out amongst other applicants, because not only does this express that you I've learned the analytical, qualitative, and quantitative skills it takes to be a researcher, or that you've been exposed to that, but it shows you've dedicated yourself into the less flashy parts of medicine. Because when you're practicing medicine, taking people's heart rates, looking at different diseases, you are putting into practice the research. There wouldn't be physicians if there weren't researchers. So research is very important. A lot of universities want students who are research oriented, because in your medical education you will have to probably do a lot of research. I know there are a few medical schools that require you to do research and community service, and even possibly a thesis. And especially if you want to do a dual degree like an MD PhD, there's a lot of research in that. So if you already have some research under your belt, that just makes you a really good-looking applicant for medical schools and is going to make you competitive for medical. Alright, so that's my 6 biggest things that I think you need to be competitive in a medical school application. If you thought this video was relevant or helpful to you, go ahead, give a like, a comment, and subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me and help me get more quality content out there for you guys. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!